Dog slept beside 6-month-old sick baby for days. When doctors discovered the reason, they broke into tears. Marlo Quinn had been awake for nearly 4 days. Her nerves stretched so thin she felt hollow. She paced the emergency room's worn linoleum floor with her 6-month-old daughter, Wren, cradled in her trembling arms. Every breath the baby took came in ragged, shallow pulls, like her tiny lungs were fighting through mud. It made Marlo's heart knock painfully against her ribs. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please," she whispered, pressing her cheek to Wren's fever-hot forehead. Beside her, Bear, their broad-shouldered golden-brown rescue dog, stuck to her legs like glue. He'd barely slept, barely moved, barely blinked since Wren's symptoms had started. His entire body hovered protectively around the infant, as if he were shielding her from some invisible danger only he could sense. People in the waiting room stared. A few whispered. One elderly man muttered something about animals not belonging here, but Marlo didn't care. Right now, Bear was the only thing keeping her sane. Every time Wren's breathing worsened, Bear would nudge Marlo's leg urgently, whining in distress before any machine or doctor noticed anything. Mrs. Quinn, a tired-looking ER doctor, called, stepping toward her with a clipboard. His glasses sat crooked on his face, and exhaustion dragged down his expression. "The tests we ran suggest a simple viral infection. Rest, fluids, monitoring." "No," Marlo cut in, her voice shaky but fierce. "Something is wrong. My daughter can barely breathe, and Bear has been alerting non-stop." The doctor gave the kind of gentle, forced smile medical staff reserved for anxious parents, and Marlo's stomach twisted. She felt dismissed. Again. But before she could protest, Bear suddenly stiffened. His ears shot forward, his nails scraping sharply against the floor as he leaned toward Wren. Marlo froze. She knew that look. 2 seconds later, Wren's lips began losing color. "Help!" Marlo screamed as her legs buckled. The doctor's clipboard clattered to the ground. A nearby nurse sprinted over. The ER instantly shifted from sluggish waiting to frantic motion. Bear pressed against Marlo's side to keep her upright, but when the medical team tried to reach Wren, he positioned himself between them, growling low and protective. "Bear, let them help," Marlo sobbed. Instantly the dog moved aside, but stayed close, watching every hand that touched the baby. Nurse Sandra knelt beside them, her eyes sharp and assessing. "How long has the dog been reacting like that?" "Days," Marlo cried. "He won't leave her. He sleeps under her crib. Every time I put her down, he panics." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "Animals pick up things we sometimes miss." She snapped orders to a nearby doctor. "I want a full cardiac panel, and page pediatric cardiology now." The doctor who had dismissed her earlier opened his mouth to argue, but Sandra's glare cut him to silence. Wren was rushed down the hall on a gurney far too big for her tiny body. Bear followed until the double doors blocked him, at which point he circled back to Marlo and leaned against her so heavily she nearly sagged over him. "Thank you for listening," Marlo whispered to Sandra. "It wasn't just you I listened to," the nurse replied, glancing at Bear. "Sometimes the most reliable warning comes from the creature who has no reason to lie." Hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. Marlo paced until she was dizzy. Bear paced with her, every paw click echoing her fear. Every so often, his head would whip toward the pediatric bay, as if he sensed something shifting behind those walls. A new doctor approached, Dr. Stevens, neat, polished, controlled. Everything about him radiated cold professionalism. "We're not detecting anything new," he said. "Your daughter's readings are stable. It would be wise to take your dog home. The hospital environment, he is not leaving." Marlo's voice cracked, but did not waver. "He knows before your machines do." Dr. Stevens lifted a brow. "Medicine does not operate on superstition, Mrs. Quinn." Before Marlo could respond, a young nurse nearby, Thomas Aguilar, stepped forward. "Doctor, with respect, I've been watching," he said firmly. "This dog has reacted before every single monitor alert tonight. Everyone. Stevens frowned in irritation. Anecdotal at best. Thomas ignored him and moved closer to Marlowe. I believe you, he said quietly. You're not imagining this. Marlowe's throat tightened. After days of being dismissed, someone finally believed her. Bear suddenly whined, sharp, urgent. Thomas spun toward the monitors. Her oxygen is dropping. He sensed it again. Marlowe rushed forward, her heart threatening to tear out of her chest. Bear pressed against her legs, anchoring her as chaos erupted around them. This isn't coincidence, Thomas muttered as he worked. I've seen machines that aren't this reliable, but the whirlwind was about to get worse. A sharp click of heels echoed through the hall. Evelyn Caldwell, Wren's wealthy grandmother, swept into the ward like a storm in designer heels. Her silver blonde hair was flawless, her expression icy. Where is my granddaughter? She demanded. Marlowe felt the blood drain from her face. Evelyn hadn't shown interest in Wren until the day she tried to bribe Marlowe to disappear, a memory that still made Marlowe sick. Bear bristled instantly, stepping between Marlowe and Evelyn with a quiet growl. Oh, for heaven's sake, Evelyn sneered. You're letting a mongrel guard a sick child. Hospital administrators swarmed around her with forced smiles, clearly intimidated. Evelyn launched into accusations, implying Marlowe was unstable, irresponsible, unfit. But before anyone could respond, Bear jerked toward Wren's room again, muscles tense. Thomas looked up sharply. Something's wrong. Alarms suddenly blared. Wren was crashing again, and once more Bear had known first. Marlowe clutched the dog's fur, her voice trembling with emotion as she faced Evelyn. He has saved her life tonight. You would take her away from the only creature protecting her. Evelyn's face twisted, but before she could argue, even the administrator looked shaken. Perhaps we should wait before making changes. But Evelyn wasn't done, not by a long shot. Her voice rose sharp and commanding. Security, remove that animal immediately. 2 guards approached, hesitant. Bear refused to move, standing over Wren like a living shield. Before anyone could take another step, he stiffened again. He lunged toward the crib, not to attack, but to warn. Wren's vitals dipped again. Bear had sensed another episode, and the room erupted into chaos all over again. Bear's growl echoed down the hallway as Wren's monitors began to beep again. Doctors rushed in, scrambling to stabilize the infant for the second time that night. Even through the frantic noise, Marlowe noticed Evelyn standing stiffly in the corner, her manicured fingers curled around her designer purse like she was gripping a weapon. When the danger passed, Evelyn stepped closer, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. You see, Marlowe, this is exactly why she needs proper care. You're overwhelmed, you're emotional. A baby needs stability, not superstition and stray animals. Marlowe could barely breathe from fury. That stray animal sensed every one of her episodes before your medical team did. Evelyn didn't flinch. A coincidence, and a convenient excuse for your lack of judgment. Before Marlowe could respond, hospital administrators joined them, nervously adjusting their badges. Evelyn's influence worked like a silent force. Everyone around her became careful, deferential, intimidated. Marlowe felt it in the air, like static before lightning. That was the beginning of the nightmare. By morning, Marlowe was summoned to a conference room. A line of hospital lawyers sat stiffly across from her. Evelyn looked composed as ever, a portrait of wealthy concern. Mrs. Quinn, the lead attorney began, "We've received a petition for temporary guardianship of your child." The words hit Marlowe like a physical blow. "You can't," she whispered. "I'm her mother." Evelyn folded her hands delicately. "The petition is temporary, dear. Until we decide whether your unusual choices are harming Wren." Thomas, who had come with Marlowe, stepped forward. "This is absurd. There is documented proof the dog detects her episodes. He's saved this child repeatedly." "Anecdotal," the hospital attorney retorted. Evelyn's lips curved. "You see, Marlowe, even your allies can't produce real evidence." Dr. Chen entered then, tired, sharp and fed up. The dog's behavior is medically significant. I'm ordering him to stay. But Evelyn's lawyers were prepared. They flooded the table with paperwork highlighting Marlowe's emotional instability, her challenging staff decisions, her refusal to remove Bear. In the end, overwhelmed and cornered, Marlowe was forced to sign the temporary guardianship agreement. Her hands shook the entire time. Bear pressed his head into her knee, confused, sensing her heartbreak. Evelyn acted quickly. Within hours, 2 animal control officers arrived to quarantine Bear. They claimed the dog had been aggressive in the hospital. Marlowe protested, begged, cried, but the order was ironclad. Bear whimpered as he was led away, his tail tucked, but his eyes locked onto Wren's room as if begging to stay. With Bear gone, Evelyn's facade of concern sharpened into something colder. The hospital restricted Marlowe's visits. Nurses reported directly to administrators. She's reported directly to administrators. Security guarded the door. Every time Marlowe tried to comfort Wren, someone stepped in, clipboard ready, watching her like a criminal. And as the days passed, Marlowe noticed something terrifying. Wren's symptoms were coming back. It started slow, slight wheezing, small tremors, faint blueness around the lips. Signs no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. When Marlowe tried to warn them, she was brushed aside. "You're experiencing emotional exhaustion," Dr. Stevens told her. "The baby is stable," but Marlowe saw Evelyn's visits, saw her bring in fresh blankets, saw her adjust things around Wren's crib, saw her perfume linger strangely in the room after she left. And without Bear, there was no one to warn them. No one to sense the danger, no one to stand in the way. One night, desperate and exhausted, Marlowe met Thomas in his small breakroom office. Papers cluttered the desk. He looked as worn as she did. "We need evidence they can't deny," he said. "Not feelings, not instincts, hard proof." "But what proof?" Marlowe asked, her voice breaking. "They won't even let me touch her blankets." Thomas grabbed his tablet. Every pediatric room has automatic vent logs and environmental sensors. If Evelyn is introducing something, it'll show changes in the air. Marlowe's eyes widened. "You can access that?" "No," he admitted, "but Dr. Marcus can." They spent hours building a strategy, documenting every time Evelyn visited, every time Wren's symptoms spiked, every minute of environmental irregularities. Marlowe rubbed her tired eyes. "And Bear, how do we bring him back?" "We challenged the quarantine order," Thomas replied. "My vet friend found procedural violations. If we act fast, they'll release him." Hope flickered, small but alive. Thomas put a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to expose this, Marlowe. I'm not letting your daughter suffer another second." Tears stung her eyes. "Why help us this much?" He held her gaze. "Because it's right. And because I care." Marlowe's breath caught, but she nodded. They didn't have time for anything except the fight. By morning, the pieces had begun falling into place. Environmental logs showed dangerous chemical spikes after Evelyn's visits. Security footage captured her entering restrooms with bags and leaving without them. Dr. Chen's sister confirmed Evelyn bought a perfume containing the exact compound found in Wren's blood. Maintenance reports showed unauthorized vent tampering. Nurses admitted changes in Wren's breathing whenever Evelyn visited. It all pointed to one horrifying truth. Evelyn wasn't just trying to take Wren, she was making her sick on purpose. Marlowe felt her knees weaken. "She poisoned my baby," she whispered. "Yes," Thomas said gently but firmly. "But now we can stop her." The plan was simple. Wait for Evelyn's next visit. Bring Bear back. Catch her in the act. Record everything. Take it straight to court. A final confrontation was inevitable. By afternoon, Bear was released due to the successful challenge to the quarantine order. He sprinted straight to Marlowe, nudging her anxiously as if asking, "Where is the baby?" She dropped to her knees, hugging his neck. "We're going to fix this boy." Together they made their way through the hospital corridors. toward Wren's room, toward Evelyn, toward the truth. Through the observation window, Marlowe saw Evelyn leaning over the crib, adjusting the blanket again, her purse half unzipped, something glass glinting inside. Thomas whispered, "Record now." The security guard opened the door. Bear surged forward, growling, protective, unstoppable. Evelyn spun around, startled, and the small perfume bottle slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. A thick artificial floral scent filled the room. Wren immediately stirred, her breathing tightening. Marlowe's voice rang out like a blade cutting through the air. "Security, check her purse." The room fell into chaos the moment the perfume bottle shattered. The sharp scent clung to the air like poison. Wren's breathing hitched, then tightened, the same early reaction Marlowe had learned to recognize all too well. Bear stood rigid, blocking Evelyn from getting anywhere near the crib, teeth bared but controlled, every muscle bracing as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Evelyn's composure snapped. "Get that animal away from me," she shrieked. "He's dangerous." But Marlowe stepped forward, her voice ringing with a strength born from weeks of fear. "No, he's been protecting Wren from you." Security officers rushed in, catching the last of the scent still drifting in the air. Thomas moved directly to Wren, adjusting her oxygen and checking her vitals with practiced speed. He didn't look up as he spoke. "This is the same compound found in her blood tests." He pointed to the shattered bottle. "Exactly the same." Evelyn clutched her purse, as if it could shield her from the truth collapsing around her. "You have no proof I did anything wrong." One officer removed her purse from her grip. Inside were 3 identical bottles. The room went silent. Thomas lifted one carefully. "All of these are the same irritant, the same chemical causing Wren's episodes." Marlowe stared at Evelyn, the woman who claimed to love her granddaughter, who pretended to care, who orchestrated every cruel moment from the shadows. And Evelyn finally cracked. "You wouldn't listen," she snapped. "That child deserves better than a mother who barely survives on tips." "I was helping her. You were poisoning her," Marlowe whispered. "You can't prove intent," Evelyn said quickly, panic rising through her voice like heat. But Thomas held up his phone. "Still recording." "You just did." Police arrived minutes later. They handcuffed Evelyn while she screamed threats at everyone in the room, promising lawsuits and consequences. But her voice grew small once she realized no one believed her anymore. Bear stayed planted beside the crib through the entire ordeal, eyes locked on Wren as if making sure she stayed safe now that the danger was fully exposed. Marlowe gathered her daughter carefully, pressing her cheek to the baby's soft hair. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I promise." The next morning, the courtroom was full. Reporters waited outside. Inside, the tension felt thick enough to choke on. Marlowe sat beside her lawyer, Bear lying protectively at her feet. The judge had granted an emergency order to allow his presence. The evidence of his warning behavior was too significant to ignore anymore. Evelyn entered escorted by officers, her confidence gone, her hair pulled back tightly instead of impeccably styled. Even seated, she looked cornered. "Your Honor," Marlowe's attorney began, "we will present proof that Evelyn Caldwell deliberately exposed her 6-month-old granddaughter to harmful chemical compounds to fabricate a medical emergency and gain custody." Dr. Marcus testified first, explaining the chemical levels in Wren's blood and how each spike matched Evelyn's visits precisely. Dr. Chen showed the environmental logs, the ventilation changes, the unauthorized adjustments, the chemical readings in the room's air. Thomas introduced the timestamps showing Bear detecting Wren's episodes before the monitors. He presented his documentation, his notes, his video evidence. Sarah from the shelter described Bear's history, how he had always reacted to sick animals long before symptoms were visible. Then came the security footage. Clips played one after another across the courtroom screen. Evelyn walking into the hospital with a full designer bag. Evelyn sneaking into family restrooms with it. Evelyn leaving with it half empty. Evelyn switching blankets in Wren's crib. Evelyn pulling out bottles when she thought she was alone. And finally the moment Bear lunged to protect Wren, right before the bottle shattered. Silence took over the room. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Caldwell, do you have any explanation?" Evelyn's voice was thin, trembling. I was trying to help her. Marlo is unfit. My granddaughter deserves better. And deliberately harming an infant accomplishes that?" the judge asked, her voice cutting like a blade. No answer came. The ruling was swift. Full custody is restored to the mother, Marlo Quinn. A permanent restraining order will remain in place. Criminal charges will proceed immediately. Marlo's tears fell freely. She reached down to wrap her arms around Bear's thick neck. "We did it," she whispered through shaking breaths. "You saved her." Again, Bear nudged her gently, tail thumping softly against the courtroom floor. Over the next few days, Wren made remarkable progress. Without the chemical exposure, her lungs cleared, her breathing steadied, and for the first time in weeks, she slept peacefully. Marlo stayed by her side through every hour, but she wasn't alone anymore. Thomas visited often, checking Wren's vitals, bringing coffee, offering quiet support that meant more to her than she could express. One evening, as the sun set through the hospital windows, he said softly, "You fought harder than anyone I've ever seen." Marlo's eyes filled with tired gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." And Bear, Thomas added, smiling down at the dog curled beside Wren's crib. The real doctor in the family. Bear lifted his head proudly, as if he understood. Months passed. Summer arrived, warm and bright. In a quiet park not far from the hospital, Wren, now 10 months old, took her first wobbly steps. Bear hovered beside her the entire time, nudging her gently whenever she teetered too far. His gold Humane Society medal glinted in the sunlight. Marlo spread out a picnic blanket, while Thomas played with Wren, helping her stack colorful blocks. Every laugh, every clear breath, every moment of peace felt like a gift they had fought for together. The children's hospital called, Thomas said, sitting beside her. "They want Bear to visit the pediatric ward every week. They think he'll help calm sick kids. He'll love that," Marlo said, smiling. "He was born to take care of others." Thomas hesitated for a moment, then spoke with quiet sincerity. "My lease ends next month. And my apartment, it has a big fenced yard. Plenty of room for Bear, and for Wren." He paused, looking at her with warm eyes. "And for you. If you want." Marlo's breath caught. She looked at her daughter toddling on the grass, at Bear following her like a guardian shadow, at the man who had stood with her through every nightmare. "Are you asking us to move in with you?" she asked softly. "I'm asking us to be a family," he said. Marlo's heart swelled. Before she could answer, Wren took 3 determined steps forward and collapsed into Thomas's lap, giggling. Bear barked in celebration. Marlo leaned in, kissed Thomas gently, and whispered, "Yes," to everything. Bear settled at her knee, resting his head contentedly, as if finally, his family was safe. They had survived something dark and dangerous. They had unmasked betrayal, outsmarted power, and protected the most vulnerable life among them. Now, in the warm sunlight of a peaceful afternoon, they could finally begin again. Together, a mother, a daughter, a loyal dog, and the man who chose to stand with them. A family born from love, loyalty, and the courage to fight for what mattered most.